Hello, everyone. How are you guys today? Happy Friday. All right. So today we're going to be talking about design thinking for all teams. And before getting there, obviously, I wanted to talk to you guys about who I am. Right. So I'm Sam. I'm the director of product design at Vena Solutions. We'll talk about exactly what Vena is. Yes, represent. In the past 12 years of doing design, I think one of the things that I've loved and started to realize about myself is that I love solving complex problems. A bit of a fun fact about me is that actually English is my third language. And through a lot of this, I've learned that it's actually a strength, not a weakness. And it sort of got me to realize that, it's such a great and fantastic thing of just being diverse and being able to sort of like think through different pieces of the puzzles from different languages when you're actually talking or communicating. So it's actually an interesting piece that I've learned about myself. Pandemic has been very hard for everyone. So I can say that through pandemic, this guy got me through it. So his name is Kiwi. He's my pandemic puppy. Also, she got me through it. So I'm the first time gunkle. And through that, she's also a COVID baby and quite an extrovert, I must say. And she is fantastic because I'm learning new things from her. And lastly, I'm actually a big champion of accessibility and inclusivity. And there's a reason for that. And that is because both of my parents are disabled. So I grew up with two disabled parents, and they've taught me so much to the state that I know. Now, let's talk about Vena. Okay, this is not possible. Sounds good. So this used to be green. So let's go from there. It's not accessible, and I go crazy there. So let's talk about Vena, right? So don't worry about those numbers anymore because it's not showing, but that's okay. So I would say that we are a company of financial and planning, and we've been doing this for about 11 years. We have over $450 million in funding. When I joined Vena, I think we were around 300 employees, and now we're at 700 plus, which is fantastic in terms of the growth. And something that I should mention is hashtag we're hiring. So just in case. All right, for today, we're actually going to go through a bit of an icebreaker. Then we're going to be talking about design thinking. And then I'm sort of going to wrap it up with like resources and sort of like if you guys have any questions, we can go through that as well. Who can tell me what this is? Good. All right. So we're going to do an activity all together. So either if you have a pen and paper, or if you just want to imagine it, you don't need to take out anything. Or you can use your computers if you have your computers. I'd like you to turn this circle into a recognizable object, and you have about 30 seconds to do this. Maybe I should be playing music for you guys too, but it's okay. So I'll give you guys about 30 seconds to do this. I'm going to be timing it. All right. So here's what mine looks like, which is a cute panda bear. And I was like, oh, this is like fantastic. Now we're going to do something a little bit different and harder. You're going to be turning 3 circles into recognizable objects. And you have also 30 seconds to do that. All right. All right. So here's what mine are. So essentially a globe, a tennis ball, and a pizza slice. Now we're going to be doing something a little bit more difficult, which is about 60 seconds turning 5 circles into recognizable objects. So mine are essentially a clock, an eye, and a word, and probably something looks like a hamburger, but I didn't really get to finish it, so it is what it is. All right, now we're going to do 20 circles in 90 seconds. I'm only kidding. You don't have to do this. Okay, so this is an activity that I really love. It's actually called a 30 circle activity. As you can see that through this activity, there is not one that is replicated as the same. Everything is quite unique and different. And the reason why I started with this as an icebreaker for you guys is because it is actually going to warm up your creative muscles in terms of how you guys think. So it's a lot of divergent thinking. It's a lot of like making you guys practice something that is not microscopic but telescopic. So we're actually going to get through our little agenda now. So chapter 1 is always going to be about design thinking. Now, who here actually heard about design thinking or know what that is? Okay. Okay, sounds good. A couple. Now, who here actually practiced it? Okay, sounds good. Sorry, what's your name? Okay, can I get you to sort of, if we can get a mic to him, that'd be great. Don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm just curious to know about what was your experience?
In terms of design thinking?
Yep, being part of it or practicing it.
Empathy for customers, thinking of bold innovation ideas, but scaling down with practical MVPs. Just what I saw Crazy Eight. So yeah.
That's all good. That's all good. Thank you so much. Who here actually facilitated it in the past? Okay, sounds good. All right. So the definition of design thinking, the way that Interaction Design Foundation and Institute talks it about it is actually it's a non-linear and iterative process. It is helping people to understand users, challenge assumptions, but also redefine problems and trying to think of any new creative ways of innovating. The way I like to think about it, it's actually a mindset rather than a process. And we'll get through that through this entire experience and the case studies that I'm going to show you. Before going there, though, I'd like you guys to understand the design thinking history. Through the past, this is actually predates before I was even born. So 1960s, Nigel Cross was the one who started with the based on like, hey, with science and technology, I like to overcome human challenges. Then, Horst Brettel started with like the problems that are multidimensional, and he sort of coined the term of wicked problems. So what is a wicked problem? It's typically a very complex problem that you're trying to solve for. And it is a very interesting one because it's actually you're challenging the social norm, you're challenging human behaviors, culturals, and things like that. So in 1970s, the principles of design thinking were actually the thing that started by Herbert Simon in his book. And it was actually an interesting book that I read, and it actually he talks about this of like design is actually a practice of mindset and thinking rather than just the principles of a step-by-step process. Fast forwarding to today, Tim Brown and David Kelly. Those are two names that I'd like you to remember. Tim Brown, he's the CEO of IDEO, a design agency who partners with a lot of larger organizations. And then David Kelly, he actually founded D School, part of Stanford. So both of them, they are socializing and normalizing design thinking as a process, but also as a thinking for the masses today that we know. Now, Don Norman, who you may know in part of like a Nielsen and Norman group, he's also a big champion, or the father of UX, we call it, and he refers to design thinking as a social technical systems. What are the 5 steps of design process, right? So as you're thinking about it, we have empathy, which is essentially understanding the human need. Then you're thinking about the define, so that is like deciding and narrowing on your problem space. You're going to go through ideation. This is like where you're thinking about divergently before converging. So you're thinking as many as thinking at possible solutions, ideas is what I like to call it. And essentially, this is something that you guys were just doing in your icebreaker, right? So coming up with many recognizable objects with so many different circles and constantly going through that experience. Then obviously you have to converge it to 1 to 2 viable ideas that you think of. And then you're going to go through prototyping it, to figuring out, hey, this is something that I can actually use, and you're going to give it to your customers. And you're going to see what your real customers feel with this situation. Now, let's actually think about how this works in the real practice of an organization or business. So Oral-B is the client, and they are the company that are thinking about, all right, how do we make the toothbrushing experience for kids more fun and enjoyable, and this is something that they want to be doing rather than forcing them. So they started with empathizing with the kids. They watched them, they saw how they brush their teeth. Then they decided that, okay, the problems are actually larger than what we typically think in a typical toothbrush. The way they hold the toothbrush is actually different. The way that they interact with the toothbrush is also vastly different. They can't recognize it, they don't know what it is, and they hate it, to be honest. So through that empathy and that definition, I'm pretty sure they went through a lot of variations and exploration, right? Obviously, these are not the real images from Oral-B. I'm just showcasing it as a way to sort of like help you guys understand the process. So they went through a lot of different shapes and forms. And then finally, they prototyped it with a couple that they decided, okay, this could work. And then they tested it with real customers, which are the kids. One thing that you realize if you go to any pharmacy today and you're looking to purchase a kid's toothbrush, you'll see that the bottom is thicker than a regular toothbrush. You'll see that they have characters that are fun, and quite frankly, I want one. And then it is customizable to what they want. So it is a narrative towards, hey, I'm interacting with this toothbrush. Hey, this is something I know and I belong with it. And this is something I love and I can actually hold it. So through that experience, you're going to see different frameworks of design thinking if you go online today and look at all of them. You're going to see a nonlinear process from interaction design that sort of talks about the 5 steps that I just went through with you guys. You're going to see the double diamond is what we like to call it, and this one actually has a 4-step framework. You're going to see a circular one that talks about 6 different steps. And you're going to see something much more interesting, which is a design thinking within lean UX and agile all together. Oops. And this is by a really good designer. His name is Dave Landis. And he's the one who sort of like champions lean UX and agility, and how do we like bring design thinking as part of that process. And yeah, as you can see, the whole framework of like the 5 steps is like everywhere, right? So the common themes I'd like you to learn from this is that the 5 steps that actually don't go anywhere, regardless of like if it's 4 steps, 6 steps, 10 steps, for all I care. What happens is that they're all the same and they're very transferable in any frameworks that you see today in design thinking. It's never linear. So circular, iterative, and movement, that is something that you will always see in the design thinking practice. Now, my favorite piece, divergent, convergent. So you've got to be doing that, right? Ideas, 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 explore as many as possible. Don't just think about the obvious solution. Agility in thinking. So interchanging our thoughts from telescopic to microscopic and backwards. So microscopic to telescopic, because it is always going to be that change agility of stepping forward and back. Now, we used to have text on these slides as well, but I don't know what happened. So we're just going to go through it and see how it goes. So case studies that I wanted to show you today, they're actually solving different types of problems. One is about a human problem. We're going to be talking about a business problem. We're going to be thinking about a business innovation that make millions and millions. And we're also going to be talking about a social norm problem and how that comes into play all within design thinking. First one, I have friends at GE. This is, so how many of you guys actually like gone through MRI, God forbid? Yeah, okay, perfect. How many of you guys were actually scared of it when you went into it? Yes, exactly. So this is an interesting piece because I, as an adult, also went through it and I was scared. So when I was Googling and like, okay, what is it? Like, what's going on? GE actually solved this problem for a lot of kids. If you go to a lot of sick kids hospitals, maybe not in Canada, but mostly across the world, I've seen this actually, where most of the MRI machines look like this. And the reason why it's because that team decided to empathize with the kids, decided to understand why kids are so afraid of these machines. It causes them more anxiety than actual proper diagnosis. So it's hurting the kid. So what they ended up doing is that they started to empathize. They started to figure out what do kids do in these hospitals that are like essentially admitted there. And through time, they realized that kids love characterizations. Kids love stories. Kids love narratives, and that is exactly what they did. With some stickers, maybe some paint, they created something very interesting. So then now nurses, when they need to take kids to the diagnosis with an MRI machine, the way that they actually do it is that they give them a hat. They say, you're a pilot, you're a pirate, whatever that story is, they'll give you that narrative. They gamify that experience. They actually make it so exciting that they go through it and they don't feel fear. That's the power of design thinking here. Now, let's talk about American Express. Who here has an American Express card? Okay, sounds good. So through American Express, when you're thinking about credit cards, typically you're thinking about, okay, they just want me engaged in that financial industry to be like part of like, I don't know, rewards or okay, points or things like that, right? That's they engage with you. That's the way that they typically think about it. And when the end of the month comes, it's like, hey, pay your bill. Now, American Express actually partnered with IDEO, Tim Brown's company, and they decided to think about we need to change the level of engagement with our customers to be a lot more deeper rather than just be okay, here's points, here are rewards, and let's go through just like the typical experience that most credit card companies do. They introduced Planet. This is a much more flexible way for millennials who are just coming into the workforce and earning money to sort of think about, okay, I need to pay down my debt, and okay, I need to actually engage better so I have a much more flexible planning experience. So Planet, actually to this date, has over $4 billion of revenue. And this was a very successful problem for the business because now they have the most engaged millennial sector in the industry of credit card companies. And that is extremely powerful. All right, who here is an Amazon Prime member? I think that's everyone almost. Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. So let's talk about Amazon Prime, right? We are in an area that right now we think this is the norm. In early 2000s, that was not the norm. In early 2000s, this was actually a struggle for Amazon. They were having a very hard time to compete with eBay or any other companies out there. So what they ended up actually doing is Bezos had this like sort of idea of like, hey, anyone in the company can provide ideas, unsolicited, like whatever budget you guys think. So pretty much open for the entire organization. There's a senior developer, Charlie Wizard, who I think now is at the VP level at Amazon still. But what he ended up doing is that he sort of gave an idea of how to all you can eat overnight shipping sort of an experience. Bezos saw that idea, loved it. So then what ended up happening was that they went through a lot of discovery. They went through a lot of experience of changing things, and they came up with the name Prime. And that was like, okay, I want to remove the barriers of ordering and shipping. That's how Amazon got in front of everybody else. And now to this date, this is actually bringing, I think, a revenue of like $11.7 billion just within the Prime business. And now it's a giant, right? So we have the Prime videos, we have Prime music. I'm sure he's going to be taking on the world with like this whole Prime logo. Okay. The next piece is actually going to be a 2-minute video that I like you guys to think about. How many of you guys actually seen the piano staircase in Toronto? Yeah. Okay, perfect. How many of you actually walked up and down of it? All right, two people. Sounds good. All right, so this example is actually a Volkswagen team that experimented on. And they were thinking about a social problem. And I'm going to obviously play the music, but this experiment was so successful that they've implemented it across the world in large cities. So let's watch it together. Okay, so with that music and that example, one thing that Volkswagen team did, they actually changed the behaviors of humans for the better. So there is a change agility here. Now, what are the some uncommon themes that you can sense from these four different case studies that I've shown you guys? Can anyone guess without actually just these ones? Is there anything additional to these that you found in the four common studies that you can think of? None? Okay. So thinking outside of the box, removing barriers. That's like the biggest piece that I'd like you to take away from this sense. The other piece is that often they're not designer led, but design influenced. So they think about the design practice. Solving complex problems don't take one definition. It takes many. And you need to really empathize with your customers. That is the core thing I like you guys to understand from all four case studies. They took what they understood from their customers and turned it into an opportunity. So, last thing, driving business impact, and obviously working as a team to come up with a solution. Ideas do not come in silos. Now, let's go through a bit of a story time, right? When I was a junior designer, many years ago, I sort of thought about design as, I as a designer hold a special place. I as a designer need to champion the whole design experience in the entire organization wherever I work. I as a designer have to think about customer centricity solutions when we're thinking about design thinking. I as a designer have to make sure that stakeholders are understanding the empathy and like the sort of the customer behaviors, and I have to champion it. Sounds like a lot, right? One time I remember this really clearly that I was presenting in a company town hall. And through that company town hall, I was showcasing the biggest project that I've done through design thinking. I was showing the process. I was showing the sort of the evaluation process of how we went through it. I showed like our sort of the research, the synthesis, the empathy, what our sort of findings were, how do we decided to go through the problems. And then I sort of like showed the ideas that we went through, what we tested, what the customer said, and here's the outcome that we wanted. I didn't know this, but it had such a big impact in the company because after that, I got 10 Slack messages from different departments as leaders, and they were the ones who said, I love this. How did you do it? What was the problem? How did you go through it? Who taught you this? And I was like, oh, wow, like people are actually interested to solve problems different than how we solve problems in general. So me being a champion of design, I sort of partnered with a couple of different department leads, and we started to do a couple of these design thinking exercises with them to solve their problems and see where we can go. We had really great traction, and we had great success there. But I'm only one designer, and my fellow designers were like, hey, I'm too busy. So how do I make this scalable? I adapted the personal trainer model. Typically when you are having a personal trainer, um, it's typically like, okay, let me show you the sort of like the weights that you're picking up. Let me show you the form. Let me show you how you're going to use the machine. And you just watch, you learn, you observe. It's like, okay, cool, I got this. But in the design world, it's almost a similar way. You give them cards, you give them canvases, you give them workbooks, you give them resources, you give them things that they can actually use. And you help them through leading by example first, maybe, or just like doing a couple of dry runs to see how they will be facilitating these conversations. Through that experience, I've actually sat down and had them lead while I was a participant in these workshops. And through that, I'm learning their change behavior, their mindset behavior. I'm learning how they're talking to their teams. I'm learning what exactly is it so different that they're doing versus how I do it when I'm facilitating. And when I sort of started to sort of like realize, okay, this is a very interesting piece that they can really do it and they feel empowered to do it, that I don't have to facilitate all the time, I came out with a few realizations. Through the realization, I realized that through those type of facilitations, their teams and their cross-functional stakeholders are a lot more engaged. They are working together a lot more. They're organically having the conversations now in terms of, oh, we have this problem. Cool, let's talk to a few customers. Okay, cool. Let's think about bringing, content, marketing, whatever, into the meeting. Okay, cool. Let's brainstorm together about some of the ideas that they might have. And finally, they're like, okay, I think that this is a good solution, but is it? Can we do A/B testing? Can we do something a little bit different? That was the first biggest thing. It became a mindset shift. It became something a lot different than what it was in terms of how I thought of like process. And on top of all of these, there's more cross-functional conversations. There's more dynamics in terms of how they're talking. And lastly, that it became a big realization for me that design thinking is a mindset. Through that mindset, I realized that everyone is just much more confident. I realized that, by being part of a creation of something, it has influenced so many individuals to sort of think in the same way and feel empowered. And honestly, now that I look back, it makes total sense. It just does. And the reason why I say that is because as a designer, I wasn't that special. I wasn't anything like that. When I think about like, ooh, I should champion everything. I was like, okay, this is a humble moment for me. I was like, I'm nothing special. I'm just there to help organizations think creatively and think outside the box. Through that, um, I realized something else that I was like, holy shit, everyone has this. And the reason why I say this is because when you're thinking about buying an apartment, when you're thinking about maybe even renting one, right? Toronto is very expensive, let's face it. So even with like that realization, the first thing that you're doing, you're actually empathizing with yourself. I need a bigger place. I need a place of my own. There's so many problems I have. Through that experience, you're actually going to be sort of like, okay, I need to find a way to find an apartment. You're going to see maybe 2, 4, sometimes 12, in this market, maybe 15 or 20 of apartments before you're like, I'm deciding on one thing, one apartment. Now, that's essentially how design thinking typically works in a work environment, right? You go from empathizing with people to that. So the real life example is like essentially all of us have that in us, that sort of a thinking. We all have it. Either it's clothes, either it's like home, maybe cars. And it's very interesting that we never bring that into our work environment. We never solve problems that way. We never take a step back and say, whoa, 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 maybe there are a bunch of options. We're just typically, okay, problem, solution, done, let's move on, right? So given this history and that sort of like example that we all have that inner creativity and inner artistic and inner like solutioning of like bunchable ideas, we are going to see about how I apply them today as a key takeaways, but also how I apply it at Vena. The very first thing is actually about instead of solutionizing, you need to start falling in love with the problem. The reason why I say that is because if you fall in love with the problem, the more you want to actually explore solutions around this. One thing I always do, this is like, actually, some of this is recent, some of this is quite old. What I do at Vena is like, I have something called a customer problem board. And through the customer problem board, I actually start telling all of my stakeholders who are part of any sort of exercise that we do to start writing down all the problems, put it on the wall, put it on Miro, put it on, like, I don't know, wherever online, FigJam, and have them go through it. And the reason why I do that, it's because it will help us come up with as many ideas as possible. So the next thing is about when you're thinking about the solution, don't come up with one. Come up with many, many, many. Think divergently before convergent. So then one thing I do is idea boards. I want to see how often idea boards are essentially being used. This is something that I do multiple times a year with like just stakeholders across my organization today. I have my problem boards, I have my idea boards, and then I have sort of like a cross-functional team that come together, and we get to sit down together and come up with as many sort of exercises and different pieces of the factory that we need to sort of bring together, all the pipes, all the things. So here we have amazing team members who are doing this cross-team collaboration of coming with better ideas that can suit our customers' needs. Through that, we bring your inner creativity to the table. So we exercise it through dot voting. So that's how we prioritize. Through that prioritization of deciding, okay, what are we converging on? Best ideas here that from that exercise previously did not come from designers. Not a single designer. It was all development, product management, sales, marketing. That's the different piece. And lastly, when deciding on the ideas, we're thinking about our parameters, barriers, things that will hold us back from getting to our last piece. Now, we need to focus on small experimentations because that's the realistic of our business. And you have to ask what's possible now versus future. So the example that I have here through a lot of the ideation that we do is Vena is looking to implement a notification center. And through this notification center, we are thinking about, okay, we want it on the go. We want customers to use it at any time when they're going anywhere. But that's not realistic. It's our vision. That's where we want to go. So where we can go today is where we dumb it down. We bring it a step back. It's like, okay, what is it that we can do today? And through that, we can think actually notification center can be something within our platform. First steps, move on maybe to emails after. Then maybe we will move into like, okay, on the go, approvals, notifications, whatever it is. You have to think about what's possible for us now. It's similar to, again, like buying a house. I want a $50 million house, but it's possible? Hell no. But that is like essentially you want to think about like where you can go. How do I take those steps to get to that $50 million house? And that is what it is. So the summary of my key takeaways is that obviously understand your customers and end users. You have a team mindset and solve problems cross-functionally. Don't think as I'm that person, I'm going to do everything, I have all the power. No. Bring the most differentiated ideas into the table, work with them. You're going to learn a thing or two from that experience. Focusing on divergent, many ideas. Don't just come up with one or two and say, okay, I'm done. Come with as many as possible. If you're thinking of just one thing, what's that? Like, how's that going to make you think outside the box? How is that going to make you innovative? And then you can start converging on that. Think about your barriers. Think about like what are some of the restrictions that you have to go through. All right, how do I get there? What do I want to do? Last thing, practicing design thinking by applying it into your day-to-day. This is not something that you can sort of say, okay, from this talk, I'm going to go out there and like, it's a mindset, woohoo, right? That's not it, right? What you want to do is like you want to start applying it bit by bit through any problems that you're solving. Maybe it's just about a conversation you want to have when you see a problem by a couple of different people. It's like, hey, I have this problem. How would you go about solving it? Maybe it's actually about I need to just talk to customers and really figure out who they are. Maybe it's actually about I need to talk to much more my developers, my salespeople, and get their ideas and perspectives. Maybe it's something completely different. The thing is that don't ever think about it as I'm going to walk out of here and I'm going to be the biggest champion of it, but more so of like, how do I change my mindset? How do I bring what we think and narrow, like essentially how we go as human beings in our day-to-day problems that we have, choosing clothes, choosing homes, things like that. How do I apply the same mindset into my product work, into my business, into my service? So with that being said, I'm going to give you guys a couple of different resources that has helped me over time. And sometimes, even though I've been doing this for like maybe 12 or 2 years, I still go back to these resources because there's always something that I missed, or maybe I've learned again, or maybe I focus on something different. So, D-School, best place to find that collection of resources that are going to give you the activities you can practice with your teams today. Second piece, stop talk and start making. This thing is actually about a guide of providing an overview of the 5 key stages of design thinking. This piece right here is actually going to help you understand more on a granular basis of what the 5 stages are. Oops. Design thinking for entrepreneurs. If any of you guys are trying to do a startup, I think it's really good to learn from other case studies that are doing startups and applying design thinking to it. How successful they become, what exactly they do. IDEO. So IDEO has something called design thinking for educators. This is a very cool one, actually. I've looked into it, and it's actually an interesting piece because they have the same realization as I did. Learn about design thinking as a mindset. And they talk about it in a much better way than probably I have. And then lastly, if you really want the credentials of design thinking, there's so many different places, honestly, you can get this. My favorite one is IBM because I used to work at IBM, and I really enjoyed it. I thought that was a fantastic experience. Design thinking certifications, you will get that through credentials of either being a practitioner, a facilitator, or even AI thinking. So that's a really cool piece around it. Now, how can you practice this? Like, what are the playbooks out there, right? Who here used Miro? Oh, wow, amazing. Who here used Miro? Yeah, there we go. Okay, who of you used FigJam? Any chance? Okay, a couple people, perfect. So this is something that essentially exists in Miro, FigJam, pretty much any whiteboarding place that you can go to. They have canvases that you can use from a design thinking perspective. I actually love this framework that Miro uses It's a double diamond with so many different things because I love to provide this to my stakeholders because they're not creative visuals who are like, good at drawing, but they're good at typing. They're good at writing. They're good at like, things that are not maybe a designer's sort of like, what do you call it, the pros, mostly on the con side. So this is a very interesting piece that they use. And you know what? Every time I give this to executive or business stakeholders or at any company that I consult with, I see fantastic results coming just from the canvases of design thinking. And it all takes about guidance, nothing much. Then the next piece is actually the empathy mapping. I think that all of you guys should be doing this at any organization and treat it as a living document. If you can empathize with your customers through and over time, I update this on a regular basis at Vena for myself. I don't even show it to anyone else. I do this for myself just to realize and recognize to like, okay, what is the trends and behavior changes I'm seeing within our customers? Because obviously it's always changes. So I overlap it with like my previous quarter. So I do this quarterly, by the way. And it's a very interesting piece around it that helps me as a designer to sort of understand what's changing from my customer behavior. And about this piece, which is the last one for the playbooks, is actually Design Kit. So I use Design Kit all the time to sort of like help facilitate my conversations. The field guide to human-centered experience is this. It's actually by IDEO, but they branded it as Design Kit. I would recommend you to guys to actually have it take a look at this. And my last word for you guys, oh wow, it actually is not here anymore, so that's okay. So let's talk about this. It's like, the grumpy cat says normal workshops. The happy cat says design thinking workshops, big question mark, right? So when you think about that, you have to think about that. A, work with your teams. Don't think like, silos. Be creative as possible. Empathize with your customers and have your inner kid come out when you guys are doing ideas. Because a fun fact is that as kids, it's actually scientifically proven that you understand less barriers, so you're much more creative. You actually could be much more innovative. So as adults, we can actually practice that. So bring your inner kid, have fun with it. Don't think it's such a serious thing. And remember, it's a mindset. That's everything, guys. Thank you. Any questions? I'm happy to answer them. Yes.
Oh my God. I'm still in this chair. A great presentation. I just have one question. There's a lot of examples and case studies given by solving product problems. Obviously, we work in the SaaS world. Wondering, do you have an example of using design thinking to solve like a team process problem? Say, for example, we practice agile badly, or we have too many meetings or things like that.
Yep. That's a good question. So the question is like, there's a lot of use of design thinking in solving product or service problems, but not a team process problem. How do you solve that? Through design thinking. So there are ways that you can do this. The best way to do it is actually also be cross-functional, not just like, if you have a development process problem, you don't just bring all the developers into a room. It's like, how do we solve this? You actually bring people outside that can give you a different perspective about how do we solve it. But before even going through that, you need to empathize with all the team members that are part of the problem, right? So are you empathizing with your other developers or fellow developers that have maybe different challenges that they're solving, right? Through that, you can actually come up with ideas about how do we go of solving these processes, right? You can start to come up with as many ideas, right? Maybe it's a tool problem, maybe it's a people problem, maybe it's a progress problem. And how do we like sort of solve all of those areas in a design thinking mindset of like, okay, let's try something. If this works, that if it doesn't, okay, we need to go back to the drawing board, right? My best example I can give you that I've sort of started to solve for this is having a council. So we created a council a job back, and what I ended up doing is that this council was always like iterating on the pieces of the process that was a problem through our product management, actually So product management always had certain pieces that they wanted to go forward with. Development is like, okay, we barely understand these requirements. How do I solve for those requirements? So what we ended up doing is like we came up with empathizing, doing like one-on-one interviews with our coworkers before we started to think about, all right, let's shadow them for a day to see what that looks like, and then come up with as many ideas, go with one or two, iterate, experiment, and see where we go. Now, today I'm no longer obviously in like my previous roles, but what I can say that it outlived because I'm still connected with a couple of individuals there, and they're like, yeah, that sort of a council still exists. Someone else took the lead, and now they're like working through it, and it's an iterative thing. It's not like you're going to solve it and you're done with it and you move on. Because guess what? Every human expectation changes, maybe day over day, not even monthly, not even yearly. Behaviors are always changing. Yes.
Thanks for the presentation. I find with design thinking, you occasionally encounter someone with more of a fixed mindset. So what strategies do you employ to maybe convert them from a skeptic to more of a promoter of design thinking?
Yeah, that always happens, almost in every role that I've been at, actually. And the way that I've done it, that it has been very successful from my perspective, is that before doing an actual design thinking workshop, I apply the mindset organically. So I asked them, it's like, okay, what's your problem? Like, what's the problem that you're trying to solve for? Okay, here's a problem. Can you find a solution? Are you sure this is a problem? Are you sure it's not like, the best example that I always come up with is like when you are trying to order food, right? When Uber Eats actually does this really well. So Uber Eats, when they want to re-engage you back, they send you notifications if you have like food in the checkout, but you don't check out because the person is very hesitant. So they send you notifications and they say, okay, hey, like, what do you want to do? So it's very interesting because like individuals who are very have that sort of a static mindset in that senses before like they become a champion of it. At first they're just like, okay, problem is that people are actually not checking out, right? And they're not getting the food in. Find me a solution for it. But actually, it may not be that. It's just maybe that food or that restaurant or that menu that they picked, maybe that's not motivating them to check out, right? So you have to start giving them a larger perspective. And it has helped me significantly in the sense of getting them to think a little bit differently. Because now I'm actually exposing more problems than solutions. And then when you start to do that, you start to see a change in the way they're thinking. They're actually thinking, wow, okay, there's more problems here that I need to solve for now. And that is something that I do over and over again. Even at Vena, I do that. It's such an important piece of it is that you got to tell them it's like, actually, there could be larger problems than just one specific thing you're solutionizing for. No worries. Yeah.
When you think of the design sprint and the Google Ventures vote, you didn't. I wanted the fear. First of all, yeah, love Kiwi, by the way. Already in love. But yeah, what do you think of the design sprint, the Google Ventures kind of methodology of using design thinking in a concentrated manner within the course of a week? I think it's a work week, so it's like the 5-day process.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So the question was about what do I think about the design sprint methodology, and it's a 5-day. It's by Google Ventures. So I actually think it's a really good idea for a lot of startups and some of the individuals within middle organizations to be using that. They apply the same thinking through design thinking, so it's not like mutually exclusive or anything like that. So what happens is that, to me, it's design thinking is actually a process and a mindset, and the design sprint is how you can go about it. And it's interesting because I've seen the 5-day. Now, the biggest challenge I see in that is that executives is like, that's too many time and that's too long to do this. So we do it in 3 days. The way I do it now, it's actually in 2 days. And the way I do it isn't actually showcasing the canvas or the exercises. I do it through conversations. And that has been much more impactful because I'm literally applying the same thing as like design thinking and the design sprint canvases. I do it in like one-on-ones, the group conversations, the meetings that I have, because that is much more impactful when people are not pressured to put a sticky on the wall, when people are not pressured to actually draw, because that itself is also a pressure. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? I know that I am literally the person that's holding you between now till lunch, so I know everyone's hungry. But any last questions? Yep.
Probably not knowing design spring well enough. So I'm just asking these questions. So I'm more on the product side where we do a lot of iteration on the product departments. And design's always like, you know, last thoughts or like never be part of the initial conversation because the dev shop, their focus is like delivery, not focus on, users. So we kind of talk about the mindset from the beginning. From your perspective, changing mindset, it's a hard work to start with. But in terms of like the deliver process, how do you bring the the design sprint and the actual scrum sprint together so that the iteration is like continuously evolving rather than like, oh, we needed this problem and then we can solve from the development perspective and then we'll bring the developer designer.
Yeah. So the question is about how do you bring design top of mind and not just a manufacturer at the end towards different organizational cultures. How do you do design sprint thinking and utilizing those timelines to essentially work through your experiences? So one thing I'll tell you is that just like Rome wasn't built in one day, I think it's also a mindset shift that you have to do within your product organizations over time. And one thing that I'm starting to do here at Vena, which it was at that point at first, and now it's like changed significantly, is through a lot of one-on-one conversations with individuals, but then extensive planning. So I started to do design plannings and discoveries way ahead of what I know that is going to come down in our like agile releases, right? So what we do is like we call it like design forward. So essentially, like design typically has about 2 weeks ahead of the actual sprint that is about to start to go through this organizational like, okay, let's talk to stakeholders, let's validate it, let's talk to tech and like get those technical limitations through it. And that has been significantly an impact to how we think and how fast we can move. So design is not a blocker and it's not the last thing on the mind, but also design is like forefront with the product and tech leads to essentially think about the solutioning. So then when we go into that sprint that we need to implement it, we can. So that's how I typically do it. One thing that I always say is about a 40 to 60 ratio. So typically 40% is about discovery in the previous sprint before your new sprint needs to start. And that is something that I've seen very successful in a lot of teams is exactly doing that. The more you spend about the discovery piece on the previous sprints, the easier it is that you can talk about it, about the nuances, the challenges, and the things like that, and like the next sprint that you have to go through. So that's how I get in front of it. Sometimes we actually do vision work. That vision work typically happens in our sprint zero. And when we do it in our sprint zeros, and these vision works have actually been very impactful to sort of like showcase to everyone is like what is exactly about to come. So we're setting expectations also. And that has been fantastic. And it's a team work. Like I have researchers, I have designers, I have myself, I have product managers, I have like dev managers and dev leads. They're all working together to come up with that vision, right? So then it's not just one person is showcasing, voila, like here you go, you're going to be building this. That doesn't work, right? So it has to be like a very organic way of conversations to have this. And the way that I do it now, it's actually a lot more one-on-ones or scrum teams when I attend stand-ups. Actually showcase my work during a stand-up. And that has been fantastic in the sense of getting a buy-in from development and product management. It's like, oh my God, this is really cool. Let's actually do more discovery so we can actually implement it a couple sprints down the head. Yes.
It's
It's not so much a question, just an observation and something more to add to what he said, actually. Actually, I come from a testing background. I'm a quality engineer.
Okay.
And what I've seen is that a lot of the defects, when they come, they're not because of the development, actually. They're because of some gap in the design or the ideation portion.
Yep.
And it's costly actually going back after the development has done and after the testing, almost, during testing when a defect is kind of observed.
Yeah. So that observation is quite accurate. It can happen. One thing that I will say is that through extensive planning, through the design side and the product management side, you can get through a lot of these technical limitations and sort of like understanding these edge cases. What you're saying, and what I've observed in the past has been the edge cases. When something we introduced that has helped us is actually a technical conversation when we're showcasing our happy path. During that technical conversation, tech leads are invited, dev managers are invited, architects are invited, and then we actually talk about it. And
You have
we
testers as well in that,
Yep.
quality engineers.
Exactly. And then like what happens is like we essentially go through all of that of like, okay, here's a happy path. They'll bombard us with a lot of questions. That's okay. And what happens at the end is like we write all of it down. We have all of our edge cases written, and sometimes edge cases are shown within a sprint. They're not fully shown at one's meeting, right? So it has to be very iterative. And one thing I'll tell you is that I like the fact that you're saying this, but like the other, I guess the other side of the coin is when I see that, it's like that's the power of agile, right? You miss something, that's okay, right? You just have to iterate upon it. So how do I go back to my designers and be like, hey guys, like this is what you guys missed. Can we like go through it? You don't think of it as like I am done, right? You don't think of it as it needs to be 100%. And that's like, the fail fast mentality of like, okay, fine, like something we missed. How do we move forward? That's what I would say.
Thank you.
All right. I think that's everything. Anyone from online? We're good. Sounds good. Thank you guys so much. If you guys want to have a chat, I'm always happy to be here for you guys. Enjoy lunch.